So I have two questions. One is, what got you involved personally in issues of political finance? How did your career end up intersecting with political finance? How did that happen to you? And then the other question is, how has the tradition of political finance reform in the US or India, in your country, changed recently? What is causing either the biggest problem or the biggest opportunities? So those are the two questions that I want to ask them to very briefly get us started, and then we're just going to throw it open and have a discussion. So feel free to come closer if you have room, and I'll ask Ellen to start.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. That is a really good question. How did I get involved in political finance? I mean, I really have spent more than 40 years working on this issue in the US. So I think what got me involved in the first place was that I studied sociology when I went to undergraduate school. And then I came out of undergraduate school and started to study urban planning because I really cared a lot about cities. In fact, I didn't really care that much about cities. I cared about the people who lived in the cities. And I really didn't care about what my planning school was trying to teach me, which was how to draw fire hydrants and things like that. I really cared about how poor people lived in cities. And so that sort of moved me very quickly into the whole issue of the second slide that I presented earlier, which is, there are vast inequalities in the United States, there are vast inequalities around the world. A lot of that is driven by political money. And so pretty quickly I saw that the issue of political money was really an issue of inequality, and particularly over the years as it has gotten more and more important in American politics, and the inequities and who gives and who doesn't give, it has really driven my entire career. So the first thing I did in this venue was in 1983, I think, I founded an organization known as the Center for Responsive Politics. It's called opensecrets.org on the web. And we became the place to gather statistics. We would take it from the Federal Election Commission, and then we would analyze the data and analyze it according to industry or interest group. So in fact, you could see not only what Exxon was giving, but you could see what every oil company was giving, and you could see the kinds of patterns that were emerging. And first we looked at political committees called PACs, and then we began to look at individuals, and we realized that individuals give in PACs. And so while a PAC had limits, an individual also had limits, but if you had 1,000 of those from a particular company, then that company had real power. And if all of those companies were giving to the same candidates, then those same candidates had a lot of power. And I think when we began to explore the role of individual contributors who worked for corporations, and the money was, we called, bundled together, you began to see the real kind of influence that big money had. We also looked at sort of sectors. How much does business give versus labor versus ideological groups? And we realized that, the most successful ideological group in the US would be the environmental community. And we would realize that big oil, who would naturally be their opposing interest, would give 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times as much as the environmental groups could give. And they were giving a lot of money. Situation has only gotten worse in terms of the disparity of money. I left the Center for Responsive Politics in 1986 and founded another nonprofit called Public Campaign, which is an advocacy group to focus on public financing for particularly US congressional elections. And the idea there was to test the political viability of public financing in the US by working at the state level and developing grassroots campaigns around supporting that for state elections. And we were very successful in the first couple of them. But then the cost of running initiative campaigns in the US, state-based campaigns, was so enormous that we were really unable to raise a lot of money for that. And even after the laws were passed, then lawyers would come after the laws and try to take them apart. So it was very, very difficult grassroots work. And what I personally learned was that I'm a really organized person, but I am not an organizer. And it really took a lot of hard grassroots work, which is still going on. But I left there in I can't remember, I think I was there for 4 or 5 years and left the organization in good hands, and the organization Public Campaign is still fighting that fight. The Sunlight Foundation was founded with a twist on this campaign finance and money and politics theme, which was the notion that technology really changed what information transfer means and what information as power means. And so it's not just how much political money is given, it's not just how much lobbying is spent, it's also what people get in return for that. And so Sunlight has become this sort of tech-driven, sophisticated institution building tools and websites to disperse this information in new and interesting sorts of ways. So, long answer to your question, I think that the short answer is basic inequality in American life, replicated elsewhere, of course, and the desire to sort of get at one of the roots of the problem, which is the role of big money in politics.
My story is far less exciting than Ellen's. I am a kind of a Johnny-come-lately as compared to her 40 years. I got into this activity of electoral and political reform about 14 years ago. The reason was a very intense desire of one of my colleagues and friends to do something about increasing criminalization of politics. I spent about 3-4 months trying to persuade him not to do this, but he succeeded and I failed, and I'm glad he succeeded. So we started with trying to decriminalize the political system. But after 6-7 years, we discovered that the real players in this game are political parties. Because in India, at least in India, to contest an election, you need the nomination from a political party. And every political party gives out its nominations for something in return, which could be cash and which could be anything else. So to become a candidate, you first have to kind of get selected by a political party. And then, 6 political parties put up 6 candidates. And we voters think we are making a choice, when our choice is pre-constrained by the choices made by political parties. So a person gives money to a political party, to simplify it, gets a nomination, contests elections, spends money on the election, wins the election, goes to the parliament. We think he or she is now the boss. No, sir and madams. There is an anti-defection law in the country. No elected representative can vote against the whip issued by his or her party. So the choice of a voter is pre-constrained by the choices made by political parties. Choice of an elected representative is totally controlled by a political party. And we were here trying to harass the candidates, which we are still doing, by the way. So we then started focusing on political parties. And very soon we found that it is the money which is the whole game. So that's how we started looking at their finances, income tax returns, and so on and so forth. So it's about 14 years. How I got into it was that. How has the situation changed recently? On financing issues, the situation has not really changed much, except that some information is now in the public domain because of the Right to Information Act. We were able to get information, we were able to get income tax returns, so we put that out regularly, and that is actually used by people to analyze and come up with some conclusions. As a sequence, as a furtherance of that, we've got 6 national parties made public authorities under the RTA Act, which is still being contested by the political class as we speak. It is not finally sorted out. Hopefully it will be in the next few months. So the situation is close to, as a matter of fact, the political parties are saying that we are willing to give you financial information, but we will not give you any other information. But we are saying that we are not negotiating, and we are not in a position to negotiate on which kind of information you will give or you will not. The Central Information Commission has said you are a public authority, and you have all obligations and rights of a public authority. If people ask you for information, if it is, you think it should be exempt and it is exempt under Section 8 of the RTI Act, don't give it. We cannot be party to negotiating what kind of information you will give and what you will not give. That is where the matter is stuck. So I think we've got them on the ropes as far as financial information is concerned, but we don't want to give it up unless something concrete is in hand. So things have not really changed per se, but hopefully they are close to it. That's about it. Thank you.
I am General Prasad from Janaagraha. We have been working in this field of elections, or rather the voter lists, for a long time. Though directly not connected with the political funding or financing, a little different. What we say is that when we all talk about adding names to the list, but nobody talks about deletion of names from the voter list. Because this is a very key area. People who are dead, who are not at all found in their addresses, who are shifted from there, those names are not deleted, and these are potential phantom voters, which definitely affects the democracy in quite a way, because we find many times a few candidates just winning by a margin of 300 votes or 400 votes, whereas the deletions in that particular assembly constituency could be somewhere around 8 to 10,000. Even 400 votes are just translated into votes, 400 names. The election results can be this way or that way. So this is the area, field of area where we are working. And we had done a study in Delhi also as well as Bangalore. We find that the number of names to be deleted, generally errors, are 20% in both the cities. One in Delhi it was 19.5% or so, in Bangalore it's 20. So if you take that, it's 20% errors exist in all the cities, most of the cities, just averaging it out. This is one part where we are working on. But talking about corruption, and Professor Chokar just brought out very beautifully in his talk when he talked about this corruption. So we are talking about the ghost money which reaches the political parties. And we also talk about the transparency which is important. And to address that, leveraging of technology is extremely important. It's an intellectual group. It's just a thought from my side. It's a very, very wild thought. What I feel, possibly if some advocacy could be done, this is not a short-term solution. This would be a very long-term solution. Like we have an Aadhaar card now. Everybody is supposed to have, and the government is working towards that. My solution is just a wild solution. There may be a lot of possibly no's in that, but just a thought. Let everybody have compulsorily a bank account. Everybody. Open a bank account. He maybe have a zero balance, no problem. Let every guy, it will involve a lot of money, no doubt about it, initially. But then it will save a lot of money later. The corruption will reduce in a big way. So everybody gets a swiping machine and a card. So if anybody has to do any purchase or any transaction, he does it by card. And then just swipe it in his machine, the money goes to his account. Advantages, you don't need to print notes at all. It's available there in the bank as a notional 5 crores or 5 lakhs the guy has got, it is in the bank. If he swipes, that amount gets transferred to my account, that's all. Less than 5 rupee note, let us not print at all. Even if I have to buy a vegetable, a seller comes, I just swipe in her machine or his machine. The amount goes to her or him. And if that guy wants to buy something, a bread or some rice, again swipes. So, except leaving the poorest of the poor, or let's say beggars or on the street, if rest have this type of solution, it's excellent because all the money is available in the bank, available for social development with the government. And there is the total transparency. Wherever whoever to spend money, it has to be only through swiping. May the political parties may not accept it, but it's a very novel thought. I don't know what this intellectual group would think about this.
Definitely, sir, it's a very good thought. But in a country like this, is it not going to be very difficult considering the infrastructure which we need to put in place? we can compare even with the Western countries. Even they don't have such a mechanism to track, the card payment system is not so strong there. Like you're saying, at any mom and pop shop also there's a card system. You get the money, then you swipe it, you lose the money, whatever. The debit and credit happens. But in this country where, as you said, first of all, nobody has a bank account, is it not going to be very difficult to put such a huge infrastructure, wherein Aadhaar itself is suffering, where Supreme Court is ruling something negative about it? So with so much money invested in Aadhaar, that itself is going smooth, but I think it should have gone somewhere already.
I totally agree that it's not an easy solution. That's why I said it's a very long-term solution. Like, difficult, yes. Long-term, yes. But this is one of the permanent solutions what I am talking about. I mean, what we are doing is just, you can't stop this corruption. Unless we have this type of system where it's total transparency, anybody can see anybody's account, how much money has gone from here and there. Maybe after 20 years, I don't know, 15 years or 10 years, I don't know. But then, yes, once you have got this Aadhaar card which is going on, maybe this is not that difficult. The advantage is that there is no black money. In fact, what I would suggest is, even income tax could be abolished. Every transaction 2% goes as a bank charge, and that goes to the government. So look at the savings. It may be an initial spending of such a huge amount, but later look at the advantages what the country would have. All the black money is totally gone. So money available for development would be very, very huge. So my thought is not an immediate solution when I started. I said it would be a very, very long-term solution.
I don't have the full details, but I believe the Reserve Bank of India had appointed a committee headed by Nachiket Moore. And based on what I've read in the newspapers about its report, it also recommends every citizen to have a bank account. Now that report has gone to the RBI, and what happens to it we will see. But I think the Nachiket Moore committee has done something like this. And I reserve my comments on the Aadhaar card. I am sitting in Bangalore. Nandan Nilekani might contest an election from here. But I have my reservations on an Aadhaar card, which I am not going to discuss right now.
You spoke about the transparency mechanisms that you work towards, and then you spoke about the elite class in the US controlling the elections. So as Professor Chokar had mentioned, that there's a lot of black money, especially like 75%. Do you not feel like, so what I want to know is, what is your end objective with this exercise? Because US being among the most transparent, at least in comparison to India. So are we not also going on the same path of having one more elite in India just controlling the entire election process? So the question is that, like, so what is the end objective? Like, you criticize the elite section, that 1% of 1% a lot. So with this transparency mechanism, what is the end that you inspire to achieve?
I think the concern that we have about the 1% of the 1% is likely to be replicated every place, or is already replicated around, every place around the world. We have, what's so interesting is we have a lot of information about who finances our politics in America. And this is, if we didn't, we couldn't come up with this kind of analysis, the 1% of the 1%. But because of the new loopholes that have been created by the Supreme Court, there is an even tinier percentage of people who are giving $10 million each, $20 million, $30 million. How much did Sheldon Adelson give in the last election? $100 million? One person? And he was very clear that he had a foreign policy objective in mind. So that's our concern in the US, which is the dark money could, this is not a good analogy, overshadow even the money that is reported in terms of its importance. And so that's the big concern. But it is not as difficult for us to get the basic information as it is for ADR to get the basic information. We get that electronically. But the fact that the information comes so late in the process means that even if we can get the information out to citizens who care about who is financing their politicians, we can't do it. We're stuck because we can't get the information out. Sunlight is moving more towards taking the real-time information and trying to make more sense out of that. because there is a stream of information that comes through that is real time. And so this is going to be a year when we're going to try to figure out how to process the information. It may be less complete, but more timely.
There are limitations on freedom of information applicability to the Congress and to politicians and political parties. So to say that it is easier to get information in the US as compared to India about political system is not correct. There are similar problems. There is another major issue. The Supreme Court in the US has a clear ideological divide, as I understand. Please correct me if I am wrong. There are judges who are known to be pro-Republican and there are judges who are known to be pro-Democratic. There are one or two, Justice Kala or somebody who, occasionally flip-flops. But therefore, their problem is that the Supreme Court is giving decisions supporting private money flowing into public elections, which is a very different situation than here. Here, very often the Supreme Court responds what we think positively, whereas the corporates may think it is negatively and the political parties may think it is negatively. So there are all kinds of differences. Simple comparisons are not valid. And this website, I don't know how good that website is, RTI dash comparison or something. Huh? RTI dash ratings. I don't know how good that is. They rated India's RTI Act as number 2. Number 1 was not the US. I don't mean to decry the US, but I just want you to know that things are not as bad as you make them out to be. As somebody said, General Prasad just said, that they found 20% missing people on electoral rolls. We had done a similar survey in 2002 or 3, when there were 30% errors. And I, inside me, felt very good when you said that now the errors are 20%. So if on 10-year period in a population of 1.2 or 3 billion, we have made some improvement, we are at it. So don't get disheartened on that point.
When our Supreme Court, in the ruling called Citizens United, removed the limits that they removed, they said, the Supreme Court said, not a problem. All Congress has to do is pass a law requiring disclosure of this, which we could not get the Congress to do. It is not in their interest to do it. So, and that has created what we call, or think of the Wild West, that there is no disclosure of this. And we asked the Justice Department to enforce the laws saying this is not operating as that kind of political committee, it's really an electoral committee, and the Justice Department said, nope, can't do that. So we get stuck between one and the other.
There are lots of enormous gaps, both in terms of the law and the implementation. And I think if you look at I think it's important to remember that disclosure and accountability systems need to be proportional to power. And if you look at the sort of power the US wields in the world, whenever it's about state power, the disclosure is cut far, far short. So if you look at Edward Snowden, or if you look at the FOI and the presidency, or if you look at American military questions, there's no meaningful disclosure. Maybe some very basic rule of law questions, but even those are shuffled aside when it's a real question of state power. So I think it's dangerous to do too simple of an apples to apples comparison, because not everything's an apple. Like we live in a world where countries are very different, and so we need to think smartly, I think, about power.
My name is Katyayani. I represent an organization called Civic. We work in Bangalore, and we are also members of Association for Democratic Reforms. And I'm speaking very much in the Indian context. In addition to political reforms, I think a lot of more power needs to be given to the Election Commission itself. Reforms are needed to make the Election Commission more powerful, in the sense that they have no power to disqualify anybody, even when they find that they are doing illegal things, or they have to file a case in the court. They don't have powers to disqualify anybody immediately on finding that they are violating the election code, or if they are using illegal money or overspending. And those cases, when filed in the court, take decades. And by then, the person may have completed his tenure in the Lok Sabha or the Assembly. So, and they don't have a separate machinery to investigate or to penalize people. They don't have a fast-track court where those cases could be tried and people immediately sentenced and disqualified from sitting in the legislature or the Lok Sabha. So I feel a lot of reforms are needed to give more powers to the Election Commission itself. And the other point I'd like to make is about, I think a very nice example was given of Manipur. I think it is possible to do state funding of election, but I think in the Indian context, the main problem is in the door-to-door campaigning that is allowed. I mean, all the fraud takes place when the candidates go door-to-door. They slip in 500 rupees, 1,000 rupees, along with a pamphlet and give it to each and every family. And all these goodies are distributed during the door-to-door campaign. I think there's a great need to ban door-to-door campaigning and restrict it to TV panel discussions or street-side meetings where all the candidates appear at one time, so no fraud can take place, that one is overseeing what the other one is doing. And if anybody is caught doing door-to-door campaigning, I think he should be disqualified, because there are several other media available through which you can reach out to voters. And in a constituency which has 10 lakh people, is there any sense in doing door-to-door campaigning? I mean, how many will you ever reach? I think if the Election Commission could fund those street level or ward level meetings where all candidates appear at one time, I think a lot of the fraud could be got rid of.
Correspond on email all the time. Giving more power to the Election Commission, again, is a question of politics. It has to be done in Parliament. So we are again caught in the same bind. We come up against the same obstacle. That Election Commission's powers have to be given by the Parliament. Article 324 of the Constitution gives the plenary powers to of superintendent and direction of the free and fair election. It continues to stretch it, and the Supreme Court sometimes accepts that stretching and sometimes does not. I am not too sure about this door-to-door campaigning being so bad, because I think philosophically you cannot disconnect the voter from the elected representative, number one. Number two, there are a lot of myths floating around about this, in my judgment, that individual voters are not paid money. It is the influencers and the community leaders who are paid money, who ensure en bloc voting. So individual voters, it's a question of only giving money to a voter. Voter will take money from all political parties and vote for whoever he or she likes. So there is a greater or a deeper game here. And why political parties will not accept complete transparency is because people at different levels in political parties misappropriate that money. If the money were to be given by check, by anybody, by the government, it cannot be misappropriated. If money is collected as black or colored or grey or whatever, then you can keep some money for yourself and give the rest to the party. So therefore, there is a mixture of individual interest and organizational mischief. That is the reason why black money is not going to go away, and we need to just do our best to try and reduce it. Idealistic systems are not going to work here, but we have to keep, pegging away at whatever we can. It's like I keep saying, we are in a low-intensity war, as General would know. Low-intensity warfare, we have to go on and on and on. There can never be a state where we will say, all right, everything is now fine, democracy has arrived, well-being of everybody has been ensured, let us now rest. So we need to be prepared for keeping at it ad infinitum.
To add to what Professor Chokra has just now, is absolutely right. They are the influencers who are in play. In fact, when we are working in Shantinagar Assembly constituency, cleaning the voter list, just before the elections, 2013 assembly elections, when we were going there about checking whether people have got their names in the voter list and checking that out, one guy comes and says, sir, you are from which party? I said, I'm not from any party. No, if you are, you tell me, I can get you 300 votes, give me 2 lakhs. So he's an influencer who can get 300 votes, he wants 2 lakhs. So these things are actually happening on ground as is brought out, and it's a real fact.
Mentioned about Article 324, that is the general provision in the Constitution providing powers, and Election Commission can exercise all powers provided they are not inconsistent with any other law. That is either any of the provisions of the Constitution or any rules or provisions of the Act. The difficulty, of course, is that the Election Commission does not have a separate machinery of its own, the staff. So they indent on the staff of the central and the state governments and also of the local bodies and banks also during the period of elections. Obviously, they cannot have powers throughout, around the year. They will have powers only during the period of elections, and it ceases as soon as the elections are over. Cases, when they are filed, obviously they will have to be prosecuted by the police machinery, which comes under the control of the state government. They will come under the control of the Election Commission only during the period of elections. So there's a difficulty there. Now, as regards cases which are filed, that is, if someone is aggrieved by some candidate winning and having adopted unfair means or malpractices, then an election petition is filed in the High Court. Because High Court, it takes sometimes years. By that time, the next election would be due, and therefore the result of the case in the High Court has no effect. So there's a limitation there. Election Commission may not be able to do much unless separate courts are set up for this purpose. But then there's another view also, that the model code of conduct, although it does not have the force of law, nevertheless it is working well, because as soon as any violation of the model code is noticed and a complaint is made, or the Election Commission takes suo motu cognizance based on some report in the media, a notice is issued, and that has the effect of at least checking further the alleged violation. But as regards the door-to-door campaigning, I don't think legally it will be possible. Even otherwise, even if it is banned, how is it possible to prevent someone from meeting another person? They will operate through so many people. The political parties can find in a village even 20 people, 30 people, who can always cover 10 villages each, 10 houses each. So that is not legally possible. Now, money distribution, of course, takes place in various forms. It can be by giving door-to-door. For example, in Tamil Nadu, it was distributed even through milk vendors by putting a 500 or 1,000 rupees note in the newspaper also. So it is very difficult to check all this. Ultimate solution is people, the voters, the electors themselves are sufficiently educated, and they are not influenced. Even if they receive money or they are forced to receive money, they are not influenced by it, and they vote according to their conscience. Now, one doubt I had about USA, that is, when so much of money power is used, that is private funding of public elections, if the voters themselves can decide correctly, then they should not be influenced so much by money power, and in that case, money should not play such a big role. Probably money is being used in a large scale on campaigning, and that may be influencing the voters. But if voters can probably, through IEC, maybe Election Commission of USA can take up this, or NGOs can take up this, or the foundation which she represents can take up education of voters to ensure that despite all this massive funding through private sources, voters are able to decide correctly. They choose the honest people who can work for public welfare and who are, of course, criminalization is not a problem in USA. The other thing is, as far as electoral rolls are concerned, there was at one point of time large-scale people who were even dead, shifted voters, but then Election Commission took up in a big way, and then over a period of time, considerable cleaning has been done. Still, of course, we cannot say that rolls are perfect. And in cities, of course, shifting is very frequent. Therefore, it becomes more difficult to keep the rolls up to date or absolutely clean. But in the other areas, by and large, the rolls are being kept. It's a periodical, the exercise which is supposed to be done round the year, at least once in a year, and the rolls are brought up to date. The other thing was at that is before 2005, one can say, or even earlier, a large number of people would not be able to vote in states like UP and Bihar, but that is not the position now. People are able to vote. I mean, people have not voted for even 25, 30 years. So people are able to vote, and how this is managed is that polls are staggered. In those states, say a 7 or 8 phase poll with the deployment of central para forces ensures that there's no fear or insecurity, and therefore people are able to turn out and vote. So that there has been considerable improvement in the electoral management. But the other point is that there is one loophole, that the expenditure incurred by candidates, of course, will be taken into account, and it's being fairly taken into account. But that done by the political parties, which may be generally, supposing some political party, that is say party A, does propaganda for party A for that party without reference to the candidates, then it will not be booked to the candidate's account. So there's a loophole that way. That is number one. Number two is the illegal expenditure, like giving money, bribing the voters, which again becomes very difficult if it is done door to door, as was mentioned by one of the participants. Thank you very much.
Hi, I am Anupama from Transparency International India. I have a very, very basic question about why do we need funds at the time of election? The reason I ask this question is because last week I was talking to Shazia from Aam Aadmi Party, and I asked her, how much did you spend on elections? And she said, but we don't need a lot of money for elections. Because number one, we don't have to buy tickets in order to in order to contest election, and we also don't have to bribe voters. That's why we don't really need a lot of money. All that we needed, all that she needed, and that's what she told me, was 3 jeeps in which she campaigned, and petrol or diesel that was paid for by the party. So what she was trying to tell me was that you don't really need a lot of money at the time of elections. However, I understand that there was a representative from Election Commission of India some time back, and he said that a lot of money is being used for influencing the media or for paid news by political parties. So perhaps Professor Chokar can shed some light on this.
Often ask people, why do we need money for elections? Because in all the discussion on reducing expenditure on elections, I have never seen a politician saying expenditure on elections should be reduced. They always say the limit should be increased. But it is only people like us who keep saying that election expenditure should be reduced, because they don't seem to have a problem with it. But one of the reasons, I mean, I obviously don't claim to know all the reasons for why so much money is needed, is lack of internal democracy. And I have a very interesting example, which at least those from India will catch on pretty quickly. A candidate from Hyderabad was airlifted and airdropped in Muradabad. He was a famous cricketer who would be the captain of the Indian cricket team. Now, the Congress people in Muradabad were very upset, because there had been people in Muradabad who were residents of Muradabad for 40 years and 50 years, who had been working there. They were denied the ticket. So for the first 2 weeks, this gentleman, if I may call him a gentleman, could not get people to distribute his pamphlets, even when he was willing to pay 300 rupees a day against the going rate of 100 rupees a day. Because no Congress worker was willing to work for him. After, of course, 2 weeks, he paid 500 rupees a day, and he got enough people, and he actually won the election. That's a separate story. But I think people need to spend money because they are not known in the constituency. If there were internal democracy, by which I mean that the members of the party, just like perhaps in the US, members of the party in a constituency would choose their candidate. I keep saying 6 parties. Suppose there are 6 parties. Members of each of the parties choose their candidates. That is one level of functioning of democracy. Then those 6 candidates contest against each other, and all residents choose amongst these 6. There will be another level of democracy. But that our political parties don't want. So that is why I said in my presentation, the final solution, if there would ever be one, is demonstrable internal democracy. Not internal democracy by name, that we authorize the president of the party to choose the chief minister of Karnataka. All MLAs say, we have given this right to the president of the party. So this is obviously a sham democracy. And so long as there is no democracy in political parties, there will not be real democracy in the country. I am quite convinced of this. So the total autocracy has to be diminished in political party. There will not be 100% democracy, but the needle should move from 0 or minus 50 to maybe plus 10 or plus 15.
My name is Matthias Hutter. I work with Transparency International in Georgia, but I'm originally from Austria. I wanted to bring up 2 points or 2 questions. One is, to what extent could public financing for political parties, not for all the campaign events, but for the parties, a base funding that would allow every party, once they qualify to run for an election, allowed to run a basic campaign, and then to create incentives that would set a ceiling for the total campaign expenditure. For example, in Austria, which is the last country on the Freedom of Information list you quoted, below Tajikistan and Liechtenstein, we have absolutely no transparency of party financing at all. But one system we tried recently to introduce is there's a lot of public funding in Austria going to political parties, and then now there's a ceiling for each party in the national elections, about $10 million. And if you're below that, if you're spending more than that ceiling, you lose part of the public financing you get. So there's an incentive for you not to go much above that. We had a billionaire who ran who didn't care about that, but there are certain incentive structures. In Georgia, where I work, we have requirements for all the terrestrial broadcasters. As part of their license agreements, they have to air political advertisements for free. Same is true for the public broadcaster there. So this makes sure that every party has a certain opportunity to get the message out and to reach to their constituents. Can we maybe think of a number of these kind of tools or approaches that would just take some of the pressure of political parties to engage in this race to increase their donations? That leads often then to corrupt practices. And a second point I wanted to bring up is, I think, and maybe some of you have different experiences, but in many cases, if we advocate for very restrictive transparency and disclosure requirements, there might be a trade-off. That the more transparency we demand in law, the bigger incentives there are for political parties to do financing completely off the books, to do cash transactions. And of course, some citizens in many countries would be reluctant to donate a little bit to a political party or a candidate if they know that the government can find out how much they supported, which candidate. So in your opinion, I would be interested in your view, should we go for a normative goal that party financing should be completely transparent no matter what, even if in reality that leads to parties and donors going for loopholes and doing kind of the dark money game? Or should we aim for a mid-level approach where we can find out who are the big spenders, who are the big backers of political parties, whereby we get, in reality, a maximum of transparency, where we get who are the big spenders, but maybe we don't know all the smaller donations from citizens. So I would be very interested to hear the views from the experts from around the world on this.
I feel like we're doing 2 things at the same time. On one hand, we're talking about what might exist and what we'd like to imagine would be functional. So what are the processes that could work? And then at the same time, we're discussing what the barriers are to passing or implementing a new law. And so there's this question of being trapped within a system and trying to change the same system that serves those that are in power. So that's, I think, the inherent tension that's always involved in governance reform, but especially on campaign finance issues. So it'll be helpful to distinguish between those two. And for any national context, whether you go for an ideal or a more incremental change is going to be based on how dire the situation is and how much of an opportunity you have. And then one more big category, I think, of question or observation that people have made is this question of why we are all so vulnerable to money in politics. Can we just ignore it? Can we move beyond it? Why can't we just have people that are better educated? And I think that that's also a really fruitful set of questions about, you know, when TV and radio are more replaced by the internet, does that change anything, or are we still in the same situation? And I think one possible answer to that question, or one way of approaching it, is to say that elections are not the stuff of governing. Like what are we actually spending money on? It's not an in-depth discussion of exactly the issues a country needs to face. It is a much more complicated set of cultural symbols that are designed to get people to do one thing in particular, and that's vote. It's not about creating a productive, healthy discourse that arrives at the best answer for the country. That would be a very different process than elections. So I think that's another distinction that's important to make.
Not just India-centric, it can be anywhere. One thing is clear, that party is different and the government is different. I think this distinction, I'm pretty sure everyone is aware of. While we are talking about parties coming under RTI, parties coming, you know, being more transparent, I think Professor Chokar can make us understand this. I think parties are private, and their affairs, when they're not in government, should be, they can have the advantage of being, their affairs can be private, and whatever financial things are anyway submitted to the IT. And of course, there is this Information Commission which also looks at various affairs. That is one question. Second question is, after the first question, I'll come to the second question, if you could just answer.
The Austrian and the Georgia question. First of all, I like the way you said we should try and take the pressure off political parties. And I would complete the sentence, to take black money. I mean, I'm always impressed by people who say this, thinking political parties are under some pressure to take black money. I mean, why? There is the added reason was that the government gets to know and it harasses people who give money to a particular political party. And this is the argument which people in India, politicians have given, that we want to take money legally, but people don't want to give it to us because they fear harassment. Political vendetta is the expression used by other political parties. And again, as I was saying in the morning, that who does political vendetta? It is another political party which does political vendetta. Now, if the politicians could get together and have a honor code that they will not do political vendetta, this problem will disappear. Now, the problem is being created by political people. They want the society to deal with the problem in a way that their convenience should not be disturbed at all. That's a little tall order on this society. So I think there is no pressure on them to take black money. And creating incentives, I think the US is a perfect example. There were incentives for getting state funding under certain conditions, and Barack Obama has refused state funding. There are several other people who refused it. So incentives stop working beyond a point. And this may have something to do with the economic situation or the stage of economic development of the country. That the incentives and the hurdles you create are applicable within a range of the economic development of the country, and beyond that, they stop working and you may have to think of different incentives. Okay, that government has been, parties are private, sir. Parties claim that they are associations of persons. But every association of persons cannot contest elections. They have to fulfill certain conditions under the Representation of People Act to be able to be registered as political parties by the Election Commission. So that gives them what is called in law a statutory status. Number two, they exercise the constitutional right under the anti-defection law and Schedule 10 of the Constitution that if a member of parliament votes against the whip of his or her party, he or she is unseated. So they are actually a constitutional authority, number two. Number three, they claim in every single one of their statements that they work for a public purpose. They work for the public. If they were to claim that they are working for themselves, I would have no question. Get any political party to say that we are working for ourselves. Number three. Number four, the financial data that we have collected from the Director of Estates, which is a government organization, from the Income Tax Department, which is the government organization, from Doordarshan and All India Radio, there the figures are given in the CIC's order. Thousands of crores of public money is being spent by political parties. You have prime houses in Lutyens, Delhi, which are being given to them at a rent of 250 rupees a month, whereas the market rent would be 20 lakhs or 25 lakhs. They are using public money in large amounts. They are exercising constitutional authority. They are statutorily registered. They say they work for public purpose. And then I like your, since you are a young man, I will put it like this, I like your sympathy that they are private bodies. And the legal authority under a law passed by Parliament to decide which body is a public authority and which is not. That constitutional, that legal authority is the Central Information Commission. That has made a determination that these 6 national parties are public authorities. And the Standing Committee of the Parliament report says that this is a misinterpretation of the law. Now, it is a well-known constitutional principle that legislature is meant to make law, the executive is meant to implement the law, and judiciary is meant to interpret the law. If there is a problem of interpretation, one of these political parties should go to the court against the CIC's order. But nobody has gone to the court. They want to amend the law. Obviously, there is something wrong. So there is no question, my dear friend, that in my mind, and even if they amend the RTI Act, we will go to the court. We did that in 2002 when they amended the Representation of People Act, and the Supreme Court upheld our petition saying the amendment is unconstitutional. We will do that again, and God willing, we will succeed.
Go ahead with the second half.
Yeah, there's just one more question, and we spoke about internal democracy and how it is, of course, necessary for all parties to be practicing internal democracy. But suppose there is a party that comes tomorrow, and I mean, as of now, also there are no parties that are practicing that. But it's in their hands to, say, this is I can take decisions. You just can't impose certain rules like an internal democracy. From a legal perspective, I'm only asking.
They will not be registered by the Election Commission. Because under the Representation of People Act, there are what is called rules under an act, which are notified by the government. Those rules have a provision for that for registration registration as a political party, the association of persons has to satisfy XYZ conditions. One of them is that it should have a constitution. A copy of the constitution has to be given. And if a party says that we shall be a dictatorial organization, it will not be registered.
So I have a question that's slightly tangential. I work with an organization called Hayya, and what we do is train community organizers to work on civic issues. And it seems to me as though an important stakeholder in this work are citizens themselves, actually, to be able to fight for increased transparency through the political process. And as we talk about open data and increased transparency and accountability, I was talking to Tom about this during lunch, but I'm just really interested in examples that Sunlight may have in the US, or even if Professor Chokar has seen examples here in India or in other parts of the world where many of you come from, where we've been successful in not only making this information available through a website, because often a website doesn't actually mean that it's usable or understandable by citizens. So for example, you know, the ADR tools are tools that we often give our citizens in neighborhoods. However, they need a lot of guidance to be able to even navigate them. And so what are we doing to make it easier for like the housewives, the college students to be able to actually understand these issues so that they can become larger stakeholders to help us fight this fight?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, although I'll be boring you partly since I already gave some of this answer at lunch. I think that Ellen touched on some of this with her opening remarks, noting the difficulty dividing between the organizing task, which really requires a specific set of skills, is very difficult and very important, and the work that many of us and many of the organizations in this room do. For Sunlight's part, we do explicitly reach out to journalists, to activist organizations, to nonprofits in the space, and try to do trainings to make sure that they're familiar with the tools that we build and the issues that we cover. We do that by going to conferences, by offering webinars, by reaching out specifically and responding to inquiries that come in. Another part of the strategy relates to some of the openness tactics that I discussed earlier. Our APIs can be used to power advocacy. One of the most used features that we offer, for instance, is taking someone's location and providing contact information for their representatives. And although there are many issues that we might not take a stand on, there are campaigns for specific political ends that utilize our systems from a wide variety of ideological standpoints to match people up with their representatives, to petition them for a change. And so in that way, even though they may not be aware of our specific set of issues, we do feel that we're affecting access and participation. But I acknowledged as well that I think that we haven't done as much as we can. We are, at Sunlight, currently engaged in a process of human-centric design, which is a set of methodologies really aimed at considering the needs of your users and audience first through a series of interviews and asking questions and challenging assumptions underlying a project, even down to whether or not the project makes sense or is desirable in the first place. And I'm optimistic, but I wouldn't want to claim to be an expert on that yet. The only other thing, and this might be the only original part of the answer that I would gesture toward, is in the US at least, there are periodically grassroots efforts to seek reform on a large scale. And probably the most noteworthy one right now is being led by Lawrence Lessig, who's a professor and legal scholar, very, very talented observer of problems related to political influence in the US. And I think it gets the tension that I mentioned earlier between the First Amendment in the United States, which guarantees freedom of speech, and the problems we're discussing about unlimited spending and the idea of money as speech. And one solution is to try and amend the Constitution further, which requires a gigantic effort to organize people, and frankly, is very unlikely to be successful. So, I'm glad that people are picking up the torch and giving it a solid try. But I think there are a variety of different levels of engagement and organization you can pursue that can move things forward with varying degrees of, chance for success.
2.5 observations. One, ADR is too small an organization to take up citizen empowerment. I was talking to some people at lunch and I said, mobilizing public opinion is not our forte, and it is the forte of political parties. This is not only forte, this is their purpose of existence, mobilizing and consolidating public opinion. So we have not been able to do that, although we keep trying. Internet is one source of dissemination. The other is a network of about 1,200 NGOs that we partner with across the country. Our data goes to them, and they in turn spread it further to hopefully the last man or the last woman. Some of it happens, some of it doesn't happen. Second, the Election Commission now has a new division called SWEEP, S-W-E-E-P, Systematic Voter Education and Empowerment Program. They have been doing some work on it. I don't know how good that is, but they are working on it systematically, and they call it Systematic Voter Education Program. And now the half part. I have had this thought in my mind for the last about 12 years about something called education for citizenship. I believe that, and I came up with this when there's a journal in the US of an academic honor society called Phi Kappa Phi. They publish a journal called Forum, and they brought out one issue called The Professoriate Speaks, and they invited contributions to that, and I sent one, where I said that we, particularly in the higher education, we don't really, citizenship is never taught, at least in India. All education in India, at least according to me, is meant for profession. It is vocational education. I taught management for 30 years. We were trying to make people, good managers, good accountants, good marketing managers, good finance managers. Whereas I think the purpose of education is threefold. At the very fundamental level, which I call primary education, is to educate people to become better human beings. The second level of education, or the second purpose of education, is to make them good citizens, which is what I called education for citizenship. And the third, or the tertiary level of education, is to make them effective economic contributors to society. All our education system seems to be doing is making them economic contributors from day one. At least that is the target that the parents have, and as children grow up, that is the target they have. So I think education for citizenship is something. The civics curricula in India at least doesn't teach you anything. It doesn't tell me anything doesn't add any value to me to know that there are 575 members of Lok Sabha. That is what is taught. That kind of stuff. So that is the solution that I've had in mind, but I've not had the wherewithal and the courage to take it up.
Legislatures that were built for 19th century situation in the world, and we have administrative states and executive branches and bureaucracies that are built for maybe not the 21st century, but the 20th century. And so as the administrative state grew, the legislature, that's supposed to be the first branch that represents people's interests directly, did not grow in proportion. They don't have the same capacity, they don't have the same expertise, and so then we end up with an enormous gap between people's understanding of civic life and policy preferences and the laws as they're carried out. So in my mind, to build the gap, and that is the same gap as the gap between civic conversation, elections, and then what actually happens in the world. So in my mind, one of the solutions is to think about what a legislature could look like that fills that gap between the people that are represented, the election, the laws, and then things as they're carried out. And I think legislatures never evolved. And in the 20th century, the administrative state absolutely did evolve. It grew exponentially or multiplied by 10 or something. So I think that's, in my mind, that's one of the big problems that no one's really figured out how to attack yet. Because what legislature is going to just vote to make itself bigger? Like that doesn't help legislators at all. They have no interest in doing that. So when I think about this problem, I think the outdated form of the legislature that's failed to evolve is one of the serious problems. And I think civic education belongs more properly as a legislative function than it does to any other kind of institution?
Response to what you said just now about who can take it to scale. I agree that it's political parties who can take it to scale. Till few months back, this was a fond hope, because it seemed supremely impractical to actually preach honesty as a political strategy. Suddenly, everything has changed after one party has made it to power by actually using honesty as a political strategy. What did this party do? What did the Aam Aadmi Party do? It proved one thing. It proved that you can undertake a pretty effective political campaign with rupees 20 crore. Crowdsourced from citizens, and when they reached that limit of 20 crore, they returned the money. They said, we don't want any more money. But there are some nuances here. I'm new person to this, but let me just explain to the best of my knowledge. There are some other nuances in their party funding which makes for very interesting reading. One is that if you become a candidate for the party, you might be a very rich person. In fact, there's a joke going around that it's now the Khas Aadmi Party because a lot of important people are joining it. But if you stand as a candidate for the party, however rich you are, you will not contribute to your campaign. So the party takes out that political equation out of it takes that conjecture out of the equation that people are capable of buying their seats. Now that's a tough act to follow. So we don't know how it's going to work out, but that's their stated public position, that if you stand for election, and we will soon get to know, then you will not contribute anything to your campaign. Now, is this something that you can actually use as a winning political strategy? And there lies a tale. The Aam Aadmi Party kept its costs very low in Delhi by adopting 2 or 3 effective techniques of campaigning. It did not go for high-cost campaigning mechanisms. It went for door-to-door campaigns. So that saved them a lot of money. And the other is they used roving advertising hoardings. They just went to the auto rickshaws. And all the auto rickshaws carried messages for very, very little cost. Right? But on the day before the election, the BJP put out full-page advertisements in the newspapers. Full-page advertisements. This is in your face. It is said that the last-minute full-page advertisements led to a 2% swing in the vote. And if you look at the Aam Aadmi Party's performance, they got 28 seats, not an absolute majority, but they lost another 8 or 10 seats by margins of less than 5,000 votes each, which might have gone the other way, perhaps if these advertisements did not have the effect that they did at the last minute. So there are temptations to go in for high-cost, last-minute, things like advertisements and so on and so forth, because that can yield benefits at the last minute. The Indian voter keeps his or her choices to the, close to his or her heart till the very last minute, but I'm sure that they're also quite fickle sometimes. So that is something that was actually lost out when the Aam Aadmi Party decided that they will not do certain things. So this is something that one will learn and go ahead. But what is a source of amusement to me is that other parties are now discovering these things. And that winnability does not necessarily mean that you spend more money for elections. So I think that the future is bright. I think that many of the wonderful things that ADR did and is doing as actually can be taken to scale in precisely the manner as Mr. Kochar says. I think it is possible. And we will see what happens. The litmus test is going to be not merely the parliament elections, because parliament is still twice removed from the citizen. But the litmus test, for example, in Bangalore is going to be the city corporation elections, which are going to be held in 2015. Because it's not merely the Aam Aadmi Party that could adopt this, that is another 15 months or 20 months ahead. I am sure that other political parties are also going to learn from these techniques. Political parties, however corrupt they are pretty responsive. And in fact, there are ways and means of reducing the cost of campaigns. The best way to find out is to talk to corrupt people in other political parties. Many of them are my good friends. It's very useful to talk to them because when you speak to them, you sometimes end up wondering whether they are actually beneficiaries or victims. And they are able to actually deconstruct the expenditure, and they are very quick to understand that if a certain kind of expenditure does not yield dividends. And what are those expenditures that do not, that are yielding dividends today? It's not the cost of running the formal cost of running a campaign. It is bribing the voter. And it is bribing other candidates to step out of the way. These are the two big under-the-table expenditures. Everything else is legitimate expenditure. It might be beyond your limit fixed by somebody, but it's legitimate. If I hire 1,000 cars instead of 100 cars, it is still legitimate, though it might breach a limit, right? So they will cut down on all that, but what people are, it's fascinating to understand the ways and means by which voters can be induced to vote. There are about 8 or 10 techniques, which I will not reveal now. Why should I, anyway? So, but yeah, no, this is part of our game plan to understand these at our cadre level so that we guys don't go and do the same things. And we have effective mechanisms to counter what other political parties are doing in terms of bribing. But I want to reiterate that the situation is not, you should not be pessimistic. I sense a huge change, and we will be able to, political parties will be able to take this to scale. And I'm very sure that it's not merely going to be the Aam Aadmi Party. Just wait and watch. Every single political party is going to change their tack in the next couple of years.
In the U.S., during the Clinton administration, set a limit on how much money they would take from individuals for their inauguration, and then the Republican Party followed suit. In the first Obama administration, they said they would disclose all of the individuals who were bundling lots of cash, the smaller fundraisers, people who are maybe only raising $1 million each or something. The Obama administration said they would disclose those, and the Republican Party followed suit. That was in the first election. That was reduced in the second election, but you can get, I think, competition to, it's sort of a one-upsmanship. At least we've been able to a little bit in the United States. Those are two recent examples I can think of. I don't know whether anybody else can think of more in other countries.
The other problems exist.
Yeah, I'm Ravindranath Guru from CAC. Of course, same Coalition Against Corruption. We call CAC, you call COCO. Okay. Now, Nandan made my easier. See, this last year's UNO observes 9th December as International Anti-Corruption Day. This year's slogan is Zero Corruption, 100% Development. Which, and also as ADR professor has told, see, there is an awakening. In India, all reforms are required. Political reforms, education reforms, police reforms, judicial reforms, everything reforms, because it is again, because of corruption, reforms are required. But today, main thing is political reforms, to which we were struggling for last 65 years. But now, Delhi has shown us the way, capital. They have shown us the way. Yes, 2 years back, Anna movement against corruption, momentum picked up, and when the authorities challenged, you come this side of sea and see, you show us. Really, they took it as a challenge, and they have shown us the way. That is how it can, within the limits, and penetration. That is what is required, awareness, creating awareness, which they did in last 1 year. They have not spent money, but volunteers. But today, COCO and CAC, we all have to join. We have to convince the people. People are easy to convince. Zero corruption, then 100% development. Let it be the slogan of UNO to us also for next election. Then Nandan, as a strategist, he wants to keep secrets. I think that may be the... Now he is a political party, so he doesn't want to reveal this. But let us take it up. That way we can reduce corruption. See, lobbying and all is American. Is a homegrown, this one is there. Why not we do it? See, Lok Sabha, Jaiprakash tried for last maybe 10 years. He was not successful. But Anna movement picked up, and people really showed that, yes, they are against corruption. And that pulse, the AAP is able to get it, encash it. And that type of movement is required, not only in Delhi, throughout India. That is the purpose of reducing corruption. So definitely it will happen. Let us take it up as a challenge. and we NGOs, we have to work hard. Next generation, our generation is over. We have spoiled the society. Let us give a better society to the next generation. That's all. Thank you.
There's one aspect that I think we could have discussed more was, I think Professor Chokar again discussed it during his talk about the paid media, which is really rampant in India today. And I'm pretty sure there was also a mention of it in, I think in the person from Pen Plus Bytes, who also mentioned about it. One is, of course, the blatant paid media. The other thing is also about the ideological, the leaning that the media in general might have towards certain parties, which also can influence, the election results. Mr. T.R. Raghunandan here was telling about how 2% there was a swing just because of few photographs, full front page ads of BJP. But a consistent campaign, an indirect campaign on the news channels, on various other channels for months together, I think that will have even higher impact, and especially news. Suppose certain editorials are, have certain slant. It may not be paid media, but it might be that their ideological slant is such that it might favor a party or two. So that is also, I think, something that we need to discuss. And that is one thing. And just before I, switch off the mic, we were talking about civic education and how the legislation should take it forward. I thought we could mention that Janaagraha has been doing that from last 10 years, called as Bala Janaagraha program, where we take elements of democracy and citizenship to students of 8th standard, 9th standards across about 8-10 cities in India, and about 230 schools have been covered. So I thought that could just be mentioned once. Thank you.
You see, I did mention paid news a little, and I stopped short because we were talking about political financing and advocacy. We tend to get carried away by keywords or slogans, and paid news has become one of those. But I think the root cause of this is the struggle between the profession of journalism and the business of journalism. The business of journalism has pretty much, or is pretty much close to finishing the profession of journalism. The corporatization of media is, a media or a corporate which owns several media houses is not a news disseminating organization at all. It is just like any other profit-making body. The proprietors of Times of India said about 20 years ago that Times of India is not a newspaper, it is a brand. And there have been many cases, and since we are sitting in the southern part of India, the editor of Hindu was recently fired, a fellow called Siddharth Varadarajan, because there had been some articles critical of a certain political personality. Similarly, the political editor of a magazine called Open Magazine was fired, Hartosh Singh Bal, and now I believe the editor called Manu Joseph has also quote-unquote resigned, because the owner, Harsh Goenka, does not like their openness. So it is the corporatization of the media which is the problem. 1% of 1% who control the politics in the US, there is going to be 0.01% of 0.01% in India who will control the politics of the country. Recently there is a internet magazine called First Post. That has been bought by TV18. TV18 has been bought by whom? Reliance. So, the ownership of media is concentrating very, very sharply. And the professional journalists, I don't know, I can't comment on their professional ethics. And I am a member of something called Foundation for Media Professionals, and I go and say the same things in their meetings too. But, ultimately, Some 20 years ago when T.N. Session was the Chief Election Commissioner, this chap, editor of Dilip Padgaonkar, had a tiff with him and wrote in the Times of India that I have the second most important job in the country after the Prime Minister's job. A couple of years later, he was fired from Times of India. He set up a media company called APCA, APCA. And then that folded up, and now he's back as a consulting editor in Times of India. So corporatization and money has become the scourge of the media also. So paid news is just a symptom. The real cause is corporatization. And I believe corporatization of the media is not a problem only in India, it is a problem all over the world, and very much so in the US, if I'm not mistaken.
Certainly.
Yeah. So paid news has deeper roots than advertisements.
The basic question is what we have not discussed. I want to raise a point. Like most of the professions, they have some basic qualification of we go to school, college, or management institutes. We have for engineers, technocrats. Our politicians, unfortunately, they don't go to any of such focused education plan. They are not able to visualize what is required to deliver to a public. So there is no formal program. I don't know in India, it's not there. I don't know about other countries. Is there any such system where we can put our politicians under some education program so that they can visualize and strategize and lead it?
One of the early projects that the Sunlight Foundation co-founded is called opencongress.org, because there really was no place to find the kind of information that you would want to find about a member of Congress. The basic biographical information, previous offices held, along with, no surprise, the political financing for that candidate, bills they have voted on, who they vote with most likely. This has been, shockingly to me, one of our most popular websites. We've just taken it down and redesigned it because one has to do that episodically. But we were getting 350,000 visitors, a month on that website. It's really a lot of people who are interested in the detailed sort of information. We also created about, Tom can tell me, 2 or 2.5 years ago, a mobile site called Congress. Not a very fancy name, right? It was downloaded 500,000 times. It's used, when Congress is in session, 60 to 75,000 times a week. We really don't know who's using this, but what it indicates to us is there's a real hunger for just the kind of information that you're collecting. There are a number of sites around the world like Open Congress, all throughout Europe, Africa. I don't believe there's anything comparable in India at the moment. These are all run by NGOs because the websites that members of Congress have, of course, are mostly self-promotional.